On a summer day in 1877, in a beautiful meadow in the Big Hole Valley, an explosion of gunfire shatters the quiet of a chilly dawn, sending cries of pain and despair echoing through the air. It had been a place of comfort and solitude, used for generations as a camp by the people. But now on the banks, in the meadow, and up on the hillside, blood covers the earth. The clear stream turns red as its current sweeps over dead and dying Nez Perce, soldiers and civilian volunteers who have fallen into the water. And the air smells of gunpowder and death. This is a place where one of the most devastating battles in the history of the American West was fought. A sacred place where the bones of men, women, and children still lie.
It is a cemetery. It is a place where brave people died. And brave people are trying to find a freedom, trying to find a home, and trying to lead their own lives. These are the Nez Perce.
It's a yaya card, it's wells. It's a yaya Kikam.
And valleys, mountains and canyons, cool, clear rivers and streams. The ancestral territory of the Nez Perce included land in present-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And it was land soon to be coveted by others. On the heels of the Lewis and Clark expedition, fur traders and trappers, missionaries, and explorers flood into Nez Perce country. Finding the land desirable, many demands for ownership of Indian land are placed upon the United States government. As a result, a treaty is established in 1855.
The 1855 treaty guaranteed certain areas to each of the tribes, and the Nez Perce were left in control of their own lands and felt that that was for as long as the grass grows and the water runs, so to speak. But in 1860, white man intruded into the Nez Perce reservation and discovered gold. And it was an immediate gold rush that overran a lot of the Nez Perce lands.
Tensions between Nez Perce and miners escalate. To alleviate the situation, the government decides the Nez Perce should cede all land the white miners are overrunning. In 1863, a treaty session is held in which a new, smaller reservation is proposed, one that decreases Nez Perce lands by 90%.
A number of the bands that lived off of the proposed reservation refused to sign that treaty and left the treaty meetings, and in their absence, the Indians who were not going to be disturbed signed away the rights to the land of the people who had left the meeting.
Ratification of the Treaty of 1863 is delayed until 1867. 10 years later, the Nez Perce who did not sign the treaty, called the non-treaty Nez Perce, are finally forced to relocate onto the reservation. They are given 30 days to move. In May of 1877, the heartbroken Nez Perce slowly begin making their way to the Idaho reservation, leaving their beloved homeland behind. Just before they go on to the new reservation, the Nez Perce camp near Tolo Lake on the Idaho side of the border. During their stay, a young warrior named Wailatitz is taunted into avenging the unpunished murder of his father by a white settler. With other warriors, Wailatitz sets out for revenge. The Salmon River raids end with the deaths of more than a dozen settlers. The non-treaty Nez Perce bands become apprehensive and move to a defensive position in Whitebird Canyon, They hope to make peace with the authorities. On June 17th, 99 cavalry troopers and 11 volunteers arrive at Whitebird to find and punish the guilty warriors. As a group of Nez Perce come forward bearing a white flag, Arthur Chapman, a civilian volunteer, fires upon them, igniting the war the Nez Perce have tried to avoid. Nez Perce warriors quickly drive off the cavalry, but this victory is not to be savored. The Nez Perce are now forced to flee for their lives. The non-treaties elude the army for several weeks. On July 3rd, 4th, and 5th, the Nez Perce clashed with troops at Cottonwood, and then again on July 11th and 12th on the South Fork of the Clearwater River. It soon becomes apparent to the bands they must leave their homeland. Across the Clearwater River, up on the Wee-Eye Prairie, Nez Perce leaders Looking Glass, Tuchutsut, Joesph, Whitebird, and Husiscut hold council. They decide to move east to Montana, the land of their buffalo hunting allies, the Crow. The Nez Perce cross over the rugged Bitterroot Mountains along the Lolo Trail, hoping to find refuge. But pursuing the Nez Perce is General Oliver Otis Howard, a veteran of the Civil War and several Western Indian campaigns. On July 28th, nearly 800 Nez Perce men, women, and children enter Montana's Bitterroot Valley. Many Nez Perce begin to believe perhaps the war is over and their sense of security grows. One of those still unsure about what the future holds is a warrior named Yellow Wolf.
There was something, a feeling some of us could not understand. One morning, a young man who had medicine powder rode about camp, calling loudly to the people, "My brothers and sisters, I am telling you, in a dream last night I saw myself killed. I will be killed soon. We are all going to die."
120 miles away at Fort Shaw on the Sun River, First Sergeant Frederick Stortz also has a disturbing premonition. Stortz and fellow members of the 7th U.S. Infantry have just received orders to move out and find the elusive Nez Perce. He writes to his brother George in Rochester, New York.
The Indians are breaking out at nearly all the agencies in this vicinity. And there will be 2 or 3 companies of us leaving this post as soon as our scouts can locate the hostile camp. If we fare as bad as the other companies, chances are this letter will be my last.
Stortz enlisted in 1873. Many of his comrades are young men from farms and cities in the Midwest and East. Others are immigrants from Germany, Scotland, and Ireland. For these regular Army soldiers, routine duty at a remote military post on the Montana frontier is a, quote, rather dull existence. Now they find themselves charged with enforcing a controversial Indian policy. With their prized herd of 2,000 horses, the exhausted Nez Perce camp along the North Fork of the Big Hole River on August 8th. The Nez Perce call this place Itzkum Tzilalakpa. Here, they cut and peel lodgepoles and raise 89 teepees. That evening, children play games. Women build fires and cook. The men discuss their next move. There is singing and dancing. It's past midnight when the Nez Perce camp finally settles in. And for the first time since the war began, many Nez Perce are able to sleep soundly. What they do not realize is 6 companies of the 7th U.S. Infantry, led by Colonel John Gibbon, are approaching. The night is cold and clear, and was described later by a soldier as being painfully still. Around 3 a.m. on August 9th, First Sergeant Frederick Stortz and 148 other soldiers of the 7th U.S. Infantry, along with 34 civilian volunteers from the Bitterroot Valley, moved quietly, slowly toward the North Fork of the Big Hole River. Stopping at the base of the mountain, Stortz and the others hear barking dogs and crying babies in the sleeping Nez Perce camp, directly opposite their position across the river. When the order is given to move to the river, the men position themselves in the willows along the bank.
The original strategy was to actually try and surround the Nez Perce people, force them out into the open, and make them surrender. Of course, best laid plans, particularly in this case, didn't work out.
In the pre-dawn light, Hatalakan, a tribal elder, leaves camp to check on the horses. Moving toward the willows, he is unaware of the danger ahead. When he approaches the hidden line of men, gunshots from anxious volunteers break the still morning silence. Hatalakan falls, dying. Gibbon and his men rush across the river and attack the camp, firing into teepees. Shock and confusion send Nez Perce scrambling for shelter from a deadly hail of bullets.
Gibbon's orders to the command was to fire 3 volleys into the camp, aiming low because they knew that if they caught the Nez Perce by surprise, that they would be laying down and sleeping.
The bullets hit the teepees so fast, it was like rain was falling. Surprise, many of them were killed in their sleep, many were killed in the buffalo ropes. And I had no idea what hit them. Some of the as warriors ran out, grabbed their weapons. It was just chaos, fear, terror.
Caught in the murderous gunfire are Nez Perce women and children.
When the soldiers were attacking the camp, they killed women and children. They were not only after the wars, but they were killing women and children. And I don't know why. This is one thing that the Nez Perceans could never understand. Is why kill children?
Josiah Red Wolf was a 5-year-old boy at the time.
We were awakened by shots and neighing of our horses. My 2 brothers ran from our teepee to take cover in the willows. My mother, gathering up little sister and taking me by the hand, she started to run after them. A single shot passed through the baby and her. She dropped down without saying a word.
Within 20 minutes of the first volley, troops occupy the camp, and Gibbon gives orders to burn it. Yin recalls the horror.
They set fire to a few teepees. Little children were in some of those teepees. Sleeping in blankets, they were burned to death. We heard them screaming. We found the bodies all burned and naked, lying where they had slept or fallen before reaching the doorway.
Swirling smoke cannot mask the slaughter, the insanity. Yet there are acts of mercy.
Several soldiers come upon Nez Perce that are hiding underneath the riverbank, and one of the women comes out and says, "Only women and children." Well, the men don't fire. They lower their weapons and actually move away. There are other acts of really brutality going on as well. People that are killed in hand-to-hand combat, brutal acts against children, where baby skulls are crushed in.
At the north end of camp, Chief Joesph rallies Nez Perce warriors to fight back. Gibbon's expectation of an easy victory is blasted by devastating counterfire.
Many of the people had strong feelings of their guardian spirits, that they couldn't be killed. And probably that they weren't afraid to die, fighting for what they thought was right. And so I think that gave them the incentive of the people who could grab their guns to group together and start killing soldiers.
Nez Perce warriors drive Gibbon and his men away from the encampment and pin them against a wooded hill, where they dig rifle pits under heavy fire. The tide of battle has turned. About this time, Gibbon's howitzer and crew arrive after having struggled through dense forest since daylight. Firing 2 rounds and mounting a brief defense, the howitzer crew is overrun by warriors who capture the big gun along with 2,000 rounds of rifle ammunition. Once the soldiers are pushed out of the camp, Nez Perce return. Lying wounded on the hillside is Colonel John Gibbon, a hardened veteran of the Civil War, a man who had witnessed the butchery at Gettysburg, Yet even Gibbon is moved by the haunting sounds coming from the Nez Perce encampment.
Few of us will soon forget the wail of the mingled grief, rage, and horror which came from the camp 400 or 500 yards from us when the Indians returned and recognized their slaughtered warriors, women, and children.
A handful of warriors continue the siege, buying time for their people to escape. The Nez Perce flee south, leaving their dead behind.
They had to just leave, Mabel. They couldn't take the time to bury our children, our mothers, our fathers, grandfathers. So knowing how we feel and how we handle death currently, it had to be very devastating to our people that they couldn't take care of their family members when they were killed.
By nightfall, the desperate soldiers and volunteers are running low on ammunition and water. For the wounded, there is no medicine to ease their pain, or bandages to cover their wounds. No blankets warm them through the bitterly cold night. Men scream out in pain, their cries penetrating the stillness like the gunshot that began the battle only that morning. Some can't help but think of the disaster that occurred just 14 months earlier at the Little Bighorn.
These men of the 7th Infantry were the same men that found Custer's dead at the Little Bighorn. So they were in real fear for their lives, especially when they came into the siege area and realized that they were surrounded by the Nez Perce. They felt that their time was up, that they were done for. In fact, one officer here was writing his last will and testament.
Under cover of darkness, several men volunteer to go to the river to fill canteens with water, while Gibbon sends messengers with urgent appeals for supplies, medical assistance, and help. The next morning, one of General Howard's scouts arrives with welcome news. Reinforcements for the beleaguered troops are near. Their losses are staggering. Of 183 soldiers and volunteers, 29 have been killed. 41 others are wounded. Just 2 weeks earlier, Sergeant Frederick Stortz had written a letter home predicting a violent death. At the Battle of Big Hole, Stortz lies dead. For the Nez Perce, the casualties are even more devastating. More than 90 people have been killed, mostly women and children, and no supplies, no help, and no wagons meet them on their continuing flight, marked by hardship and death.
The important thing after Big Hole then became survival. I think it was after Big Hole that the realization set in that the war was on for real, and that they had to choose ways to survive.
The Nez Perce flee the Big Hole Valley, hoping to find refuge with their friends, the Crow. Avoiding communities and settled areas, the Nez Perce cross the rugged wilderness of the Continental Divide and newly established Yellowstone National Park. Along the way, they fend off attacks by determined pursuers at Camas Meadows, Canyon Creek, Cow Island, and Cow Creek. When the Crow failed to come to their aid, the Nez Perce realized there is only one place they can find freedom: Canada. Just 40 miles from Canada, the Nez Perce's desperate dash for freedom is about to come to a bitter end. Here, near the Bear Paw Mountains on September 30th, they are trapped by another military force, this one led by Colonel Nelson A. Miles. Soldiers charge the Nez Perce camp and capture the horse herd, a vital means of transportation for the people. Warriors frantically dig rifle pits, guns flash, the smell of powder lingers across the barren landscape, and then it begins to snow. The Nez Perce have been in flight for more than 4 months. They have traveled 1,700 miles. Now, on the windswept high plains of northern Montana, they lie crippled by cold and hunger, exhaustion and sickness. 3 Nez Perce leaders are dead: Alaka, Tuhuhutsut, and Looking Glass. The surviving leaders, Chiefs Joesph and Whitebird, hold council and debate the fate of their people. Whitebird refuses to surrender. On the night of October 5th, 1877, Chief Whitebird and about 50 Nez Perce slip across the border into Canada. Remaining on the battlefield, Chief Joesph makes a painful decision. In his care are women, children, old men, and wounded. Joesph lays down his rifle and mourns for his people.
I'm tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. It's cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My heart is sick and sad.
I imagine looking over the handful of people that he had left from what he had started with. He wanted a better chance for them to go on. You know, they were his children, they were his family, and he had to make the best decision for his family.
For the Nez Perce, Big Hole Battlefield is sacred ground, consecrated by the blood of those killed on the morning of August 9th, 1877.
When you see where everything is at, out of the side, you start to walk around and you start to look at where we were attacked and where some of our people were massacred. You almost start to shake because it's just a really emotional, and you think that all these years would separate that emotion, but it doesn't. And you can still feel the pain, and you can still hear the woman cry. You can really hear the woman cry. And I never knew that, and I've always heard the people talk about it. And I've always heard, the elders say that you could, and you can really hear what happened there.
Every year on the anniversary of the battle, the people gather at the site to commemorate their fallen ancestors. Years after the battle, the descendants of Watolan honor the Nez Perce warrior by raising teepee poles at the place he camped.
For me, it brings to life my existence. Watolan was my great-great-grandfather, and without him, I wouldn't be here. To put up those teepee poles represents my family still being here today.
Big Hole National Battlefield commemorates all who fought and died there.
This place marks a conflict between two people, and what can we do to resolve that conflict? How can we extend a hand in understanding that both sides were hurt in this battle? It wasn't one side over the other. Maybe one side won the battle, but we were both hurt and we were both affected by it. So that's why I think it's important that the Big Hole commemoration continues, because it brings people together that otherwise would not have the opportunity to meet and to share that moment in history, to try to understand why we can't let it happen again.